Hey everyone, today I wanted to rank all the 007 movies from my least favorite to my favorite. I figured in this video it was necessary to wear my suit, even though it is very hot out. So this is my list of, like I said, my least favorite to favorite. There is obviously no ranking that is best to, worst or anything like that. So my least favorite could be your favorite. So let me know in the comment section what your favorite is, what your least favorite is. You could go ahead and put the whole ranking. I'll briefly kind of tell you some of them, why it's either in this position or, whatever. I don't hate any of them really. This is probably my favorite movie series. James Bond is my favorite movie character, and I pretty much love everything about the character. So there are some movies that I like obviously a lot more than others, and so number 24 at the very bottom of this list is Octopussy. Now, this movie to me feels more like it's a spoof of James Bond than an actual James Bond movies or a James Bond movie. I prefer the ones that are more serious, and so some of the Roger Moore ones are kind of low, or like the later Sean Connery ones. And this movie, because of it being very lighthearted, with the scene with him shooing away a tiger, him with the circus at the end, them telling him he doesn't have a circus pass, even though he's dressed up as a clown and he's got his MI6 badge or whatever to say, there's a bomb in the circus tent. The movie's just kind of too ridiculous for me to say that's one I'm going to want to rewatch over and over. I've seen it 3 times, and I've watched all of them one more time before I did this video, and yeah, it's still last. It's been last on my list since I've seen it the first time. So number 23 is Moonraker, another one that kind of doesn't really take itself seriously, and because of that I don't really like to watch it very much. I liked it more this time than I did the first time, and I like Jaws in it, even though I don't feel like they did really a great job with him. I still like him in the movie. I even like the villain Hugo Drax. I just kind of, it's a little much with the space stuff. I've seen it now. I think this one is the second time I watched it, and there are things about it I like. The whole I think it's called a centrifuge scene where he's in the pod just being spun over and over. Things like that. There's a lot in this movie that actually isn't that bad, but there's also just enough in it that made me kind of be this low for a reason. So number 22 is The Man with the Golden Gun. Now it's this low mainly because of the potential this movie could have had and how actually boring it kind of is for the most part. You have Christopher Lee as Scaramanga, Christopher Lee could have been in this movie, or should have been in this movie more, and been a bigger presence or a threat to Bond. And it just he really wasn't in this movie as much as he should have been, and they kind of went for, again, more of the silliness at times, where they that amazing stunt where the guy does the flip over the, I don't know if it's a river or stream or whatever, in the car, where he does the barrel roll, and then they have the slide whistle, and then they have that Sergeant Pepper or whatever in there again, and I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that character, but I can still watch this movie. I've seen it now, it's probably the 4th time I've seen it, and it's always been towards the bottom for those reasons. But yeah, Christopher Lee was a high point. I'm not sure the actor's name who played Nick Nack, but I like the character Nick Nack. So if they would have focused more on that, those two villains together, and Bond going up against them, the opening and the ending are great, but the middle was, I don't really like it. So number 21, this one for most people is actually in the top 10, but I just actually watched this 2 nights ago, and it's the second time I watched it, and this one is so hard for me to watch, and it's On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Now, it's not bad, it's just for a large portion of it, I'm very disinterested, and it just doesn't feel like a Bond movie. Up until the point where Blofeld knows that he's Bond, for a large portion, I'm just very not interested, and I was falling asleep. And from there on, it gets a lot better. There's also, though, some choppy editing, and the lip dub isn't the best at times, but it was 1960 something. I actually think it was 69 when it came out, so I can excuse it for that, and there's enough good in it like the scene where he finally like storms the building where Blofeld is like testing or doing all the experiments and all the virus, putting the virus together. That scene's really good where he's like sliding on the ice, shooting all the henchmen. But yeah, that first section for me is so boring that it's hard for me to like watch that movie over and over again. But number 20 is Die Another Day. And now this movie is probably the actual worst of all of the Bond movies, but the only reason I can watch it is just because it's Pierce Brosnan and it's newer, I guess, and I grew up watching Pierce Brosnan and I don't like it at all, actually. The only reason I put it here is because it's just, I feel like for me it's more rewatchable than those other ones. But if we were to say which one's the worst, I would say this is it. It's got like the worst like song out of any of them. I can't stand the Madonna song. So yeah, I mean this one's got so much wrong with it. The CGI is terrible. The villain, they have like a good actor who portrays the villain, but it's just like the way they made the villain. The writing in this movie's bad. It's like they just wanted to be too futuristic just because of the year in which it came out, and they're like, let's just go high-tech everything. Invisible Aston Martin, which I thought was stupid. The Ice Palace I can get over. I don't even like the two Bond girls very much. Like Jinx, played by Halle Berry, I didn't like her very much. I can't even remember the other one's name off the top of my head. This one was... I actually didn't rewatch this one. I just didn't want to. I've seen it enough. I've seen it about 5 times. But yeah, this is the only one of these I have not rewatched since making this list. So number 19 is You Only Live Twice. This is where the list starts to get significantly, I think, better than those first few. Just because it's Sean Connery, even though I'm not a big fan of the movie, you have Sean Connery as Bond, and it's just so much more rewatchable just because... I'm not a big fan of the setting, but the whole volcano thing at the end is iconic. Where he's fighting Blofeld and all the I think the army or the MI6 agents or whatever it is, I can't even remember, come in and fight against Blofeld's men, and just having there are iconic moments in this movie, but for a large portion of it, I just really wasn't as interested as the other ones, so that's why it's number 19. Number 18 is Diamonds Are Forever. And the only reason I put it just slightly ahead is because I thought that the henchmen were a little bit more memorable, and just like the setting I liked more. But it's almost equal with You Only Live Twice because this movie is really silly. You have Blofeld dressing up as a woman. You have the two henchmen who I like, but they're very... strange, like the way they were written, Wint and Kid or something, I think that was their names. They're two like gay henchmen that go after Bond, and like there's a scene at the end where Bond like pulls the guy's tailcoat up under his groin and then flips him over the boat, and he just makes a funny noise. But I don't know, this movie, it's entertaining, but it just feels not like a Sean Connery one, so for me that's why I have it low. But it's not my least favorite of Connery. So number 17 is For Your Eyes Only. Now, this one is just very forgettable for me. There's like the section where they're at the ski lodge is actually one of my favorite sections in any Bond movie. But like everything else, I don't like it that much. I do like the henchman. He was that German like Olympian or something like that. And I thought he was a pretty good henchman. But yeah, I don't know, just everything else, like the villain's not memorable. There's just not much in it that whenever I think of Bond movies, I'm like, oh, that scene. There's like very few moments, but I do like the theme song in it. There's a fair amount in this movie, like I said, that I do like. It's just I don't ever want to watch it, and it's just not one I think of as much as the others. Number 16 is The Living Daylights. This was Timothy Dalton's first portrayal of Bond. And I think that I don't know if it's the first half or so, a little bit less, is really good. If it was just like the whole movie kind of kept that, I guess, style, the movie would be probably in the top like 10 to 15, somewhere in there. But the reason why it's just out of it is because that second half where they're in like Afghanistan or something, I just don't like it. Everything up till where they're on like the ice with the Aston Martin, the V8 Vantage is great. And then after that, where they're like going down the hill on the cello like case, I'm fine. But like just from there on, the movie just starts going down the hill further and further. And the first time I watched it, I was like, which one of these people is actually the villain? And then when I finally realized it's like the colonel or the general, I was like, oh. I was like, okay. But yeah, I don't know. It's not, I don't think as good as his other, as Timothy Dalton's other film, which I have much further down the list here. So number 15 is Spectre, and this was Craig's most recent that has come out Bond film. This one is good for like 75% of the movie. I've not many complaints with it, and while I do have some, it's just bad from there on because of the writing, especially with him and Blofeld. I can't like begin to just like what this movie does wrong from there on. Like it takes everything great about the last three movies, especially Casino Royale and Skyfall, and it's just like, you know what, I was behind all of it. Those people don't even matter. When in Skyfall, you've got Silva, who I always thought until this movie came out he was just like a rogue, like I guess agent or villain that went on his own to go after M and wanted to destroy all of MI6 and everything that she worked for and to kill her. And in this one, we just find out that Blofeld was technically behind it and he funded him. And I didn't like. I can still watch this one, but I'm just like, the writing is so bad that I can't like get over it. So every time I watch it, I try to watch to just the part where they get off the train after the Mr. Hanks fight, and then I usually just stop. Because everything after that, if it was like from there to there, and they like for like, if the ending was him fighting Mr. Hanks on the train or something, then this movie would be way further down the list. But I don't like that last 45 minutes to an hour, and it just drags on. So yeah, number 14 is another movie that a lot of people consider to be the best Bond film ever. Personally, when I went back and rewatched it, if it wasn't for all the iconic moments and iconic things in it, which are looking back on, or I guess at the time were really big, but like everything else in Goldfinger is just, for me, I like it, and I would still say it's one of the best. For me, I don't really want to watch it as much. So the Aston Martin DB5 is like one of the best cars, and it's probably the most iconic movie car ever. If not that, then like the Batmobile, but that's fictional. So the Aston Martin is iconic. The Walther PPK, iconic. Just him in that portrayal, Sean Connery as Bond. But the whole like section where he explains Operation Grand Slam to those people, just like everything that isn't an iconic moment, I don't really like all that much. Whenever he's with that girl that was trying to kill Goldfinger, just that section kind of is boring. I don't know, but I really do like it. Like Oddjob's great as the henchman. He's probably in the top 3 henchmen for me. Goldfinger's great. There's nothing like I straight up dislike about the movie. I just, for portions of it, I'm kind of bored. That's why it's kind of in the middle here. And there's just other ones that I watch and I'm more entertained for longer. So next is number 13, and that is Live and Let Die. This is Roger Moore's first film after Connery decided to step down from being Bond, and I think he did a pretty good job. The movie at times is very strange and almost it doesn't feel like a Bond film, but that's not always a bad thing for it. He's trying to make his own style and also take what Connery did good and make it his own, and I think that is one of the biggest reasons why rewatching these movies, Roger Moore's movies have moved up for me than they used to. All of his movies for me, I just didn't really like watching, but I always liked Live and Let Die. The boat chase scene is great through the swamps of New Orleans or Louisiana, and there's really nothing in it I dislike. Some of it's a little strange, all the voodoo stuff, but I like all of it, and I like the villain, and Jane Seymour as Solitaire is wow in this movie. Yeah, there's a lot to like in this movie. Kananga, the villain, like I said, is great. I can't think of the henchman's name. He's with the claw. I literally just had it in my head before I got to this, but yeah, he's a really good henchman. Then there's Whisper, who's the bigger guy who you can barely understand because he whispers. He's a pretty good henchman, and the only thing I could say is the way Kananga dies is a little bit silly, but not the worst death in any Bond film. There's plenty other ones that are worse. So, number 12 is Thunderball, and this one has been moving up and down my list at times, and there's a lot in it that I find to be enjoyable. Like, I actually really like the underwater scenes, but there's a lot of it that's just kind of seems like it's filler, and you can tell by that point Connery kind of is starting to be disinterested. But a lot of the action scenes I find to be good, and I love the song by Tom Jones, Thunderball, and it's one of my favorites just because that song is one of my favorites because of his voice, and I just like the lyrics in it too. And I just rewatched it, and I have it on Blu-ray, and I'm playing it on my 4K player on my 4K TV, and just that scene, or that I guess the intro song with all the water just looks really good with all the colors and everything. But yeah, that movie, I would say, used to be in my top 10, but watching it again, it's dropped a few spots, and only 2 spots, but still. I still enjoy it. Great movie. Next, at number 11 is Dr. No. Just watched this one last night, and this one, for being the very first Bond film and when it came out in 1962, I believe, this is actually pretty good, and all the little editing mistakes that there are at times, are not mistakes, but problems that there was, or choices back then, whatever you want to say, the way that they edited the movie, I can get past it just because of when it came out, and there's a lot in it that's entertaining. Just his presence, his presence as Bond is just, I feel like in this one and From Russia with Love are perfect. You could tell he really is having fun. Just the lines that he delivers to, whether that's Honey Rider or Trench or the many women that he's with in these movies. I think this movie is, for the very first Bond film, really good, and the villain Dr. No. I'm drawing a blank on the actor's name who portrayed him, but even he's in it for so little. It's just I like that he's in it for that little amount of time, actually, because you don't see him for a large portion of the movie. You just hear this threatening voice over a speaker or something, and then when you finally see him, he's this tall, lanky Chinese guy that he's got these fake hands, and just the way he's dressed, I just think it's an iconic look, and he's an iconic Bond villain for that reason. So, now coming in the top 10, this actually used to be way further down, but rewatching it, I had a lot of fun watching it, and I love this song, The Spy Who Loved Me. Carly Simon sung this, I believe, and it's a really good song. Jaws makes his first appearance, and he's much better in this one than he is in Moonraker. Just the writing's better. The movie, just from pretty much start to finish, I enjoy. There's some sections of it that are a little bit slower than others while they're in Egypt, but yeah, once it gets going, I do love Stromberg as the villain. I don't really particularly like his death, but the line that Roger Moore delivers to him, where he says, "You've had your shot, or you fired your shot. Now here's mine," and he shoots him. It's a good line, and I do like that. I just feel like he could have had a more, I guess, dramatic death. Bond villains are known for having dramatic deaths, and I kind of like that. I also like that the Bond villains have certain traits about them, and he's one of them. He's got webbed fingers, and like hands or something. And I think it's interesting to see Bond villains with those traits. But yeah, I do like The Spy Who Loved Me. It just makes it into the top 10 because there are these other ones that I do like to watch more. But rewatching it this past time, I had a lot of fun, and I do love the song. Number 9, and most people hate this Bond movie, I found out. It's actually my favorite Roger Moore one, and it's A View to a Kill. The only part of this movie I don't like is the fire truck scene, from where they're like leaving the like mayor's office building, or I think there's some office building, and they steal a fire truck. That section I don't really like, but actually everything else I really enjoy. Max Zorin is one of my favorite villains. The whole ending scene with him fighting on the Golden Gate Bridge, and then him falling to his death. And I don't remember the scientist's name that was like Max Zorin was like a Nazi or something. His like father or whatever you want to call him made him or something in a lab. I can't even remember like what the story behind Max Zorin being born is, but he was basically like born from the Nazis, and he's because of it he's like crazy, and like I don't know, that's another like over the top dramatic Bond like characteristic of a villain, but I like it. And that scene at the end whenever he screams Max, and then Max or Christopher Walken like laughing as he's falling to his death off the top of the Golden Gate Bridge, and then he tries to light the dynamite. He blows up the blimp or the Zeppelin. But I don't know, I find that movie really fun, even though it's not perfect, and you can tell at times it's definitely not Roger Moore. I still like it, and I've watched it just as much as any of the other ones, probably more than any other Roger Moore one. It's been up there in my top 10, and it's fluctuated, but this most recent time watching it, I had a lot more fun than usual for some reason. So yeah, so number 8 is Quantum of Solace. Now, another one not very many people like, and this one does have its issues. The writing isn't great. I guess the editing and the way that they shot it with the fighting choreography, whatever you're going to say, isn't great, because it's almost like it's a Bourne movie where they zoom in on each punch being thrown and they like cut it. But I still like much more enjoy it than a lot of the other, I guess, older ones, just because it's more updated technology. The writing, like I said, and like the plot and the villain isn't the best, but the action scenes in it and the way Craig is as Bond, I can find this one more rewatchable. Now, it does have its slow moments where it's like, alright, I don't really want to like sit through this part again, but it's the shortest Bond film I think ever. I think it's just either making 90 minutes or something like that. But I don't know, just that opening chase scene I really love. The song is awful though, sung by Alicia Keys. I don't even remember what it's called, but I think it's Another Way to Die. But yeah, this movie, I love the Aston Martin chase scene at the beginning. It picks up right after Casino Royale, and while it's not nearly as good as Casino Royale, I can still rewatch it. I've literally went and watched Casino Royale, went Quantum of Solace right after, and it makes Quantum better, but it's still not great. I still like it though, so yeah. Number 7 is License to Kill. This is the second Timothy Dalton movie, and that was his final one. I think it's much better than The Living Daylights. It doesn't feel much like a Bond movie though, because it feels like it's an 80s like Miami Vice movie because it takes place in Miami. But I really enjoy it, and I really like Carrie Lowell as Pam Bouvier. I don't know, it's a fun movie. The darker tone is pretty good. I like it after about the first 20-25 minutes. That's when the movie starts to pick up. Once they go into the warehouse where Felix Leiter was, like, his leg was bit off by the shark. From that point, actually from the scene where his leg was bit by the shark, from there on, I really like this movie. The cocaine grinder scene, the pressure chamber scene in the boat was really good, and just the way Bond plays on the villain's like insecurities about his men like turning on him. I like that, and he like uses it against them, and ends up killing half of his own men just because he believes in loyalty. And then the way he kills him at the end, he kills him with Felix's lighter, and I just thought that was a great ending. But yeah, that's why License to Kill comes in at number 7. Number 6 is Tomorrow Never Dies. Now, I've seen this one so many times. Like I said, I grew up watching the Pierce Brosnan ones, and this was the first video game, Bond video game I ever owned, was Tomorrow Never Dies, and because of that, I really wanted to watch the movie, and so I got the game, played through the game, got Tomorrow Never Dies, and The World Is Not Enough on VHS, and because I also got The World Is Not Enough with Tomorrow Never Dies for PlayStation 1, and I just kind of, because of that, grew up playing those games, and I watched the movies. I just love those movies more. Tomorrow Never Dies, though, is, I think, a significant step down, especially, you know, GoldenEye, I think, and World Is Not Enough are his 2 high points as Bond. And Tomorrow Never Dies is still good, but the villain's, like, the media mogul thing, he's no physical threat to Bond. Well, no, he doesn't always have to be. He just doesn't feel like much of a threat at all. That's my really only complaint, but the action's great. The scene in the parking garage, and then the scene where he's with the doctor, Dr. Kaufman, and he tricks him into dialing the cell phone to unlock the car door, and it tases him, and then he points the gun at him, kills him. And then Stamper is like the henchman. The fight between him and Stamper at the end is good. I've watched this movie a lot, and I do find it entertaining. I don't really like Wei Lin very much. This one just has kind of like poor Bond girls in it, but to be honest, I don't really feel like the Bond girls make or break any Bond movie. I just feel like they're there, and they can add to it, but I don't think that any one is so bad that they can like ruin the movies. And so yeah, I enjoy the movie Tomorrow Never Dies, and that's why it comes in at number 6. So now the top 5. These are the 5 that I love watching the most, and I've watched these ones more than probably any of them. So number 5 is From Russia with Love. I just watched this one also last night or yesterday morning or something, and this was the 3rd time I've watched it now, and that one just to me feels like Connery is the best as Bond in any of the movies. He just gives off this essence of, you know, what Bond is meant to be. And then you have Red Grant as probably one of the best, I guess, henchmen, if you want to call him that. But he's basically the main villain in a way. I mean, Blofeld is, and then you want to say the Colonel Klebb. But, I mean, Red Grant is like most of this movie, and he's a great villain. And the fight scene on the train for the year it came out is amazing. I really don't have many complaints about this movie. I watched it twice actually yesterday. I watched it once with I think my mom for like a little bit of it, and then I watched a little bit by myself, and then my mom wanted to watch it, so I watched all of it again with my mom. So yeah, I enjoy this movie. I could watch it right now again. I just like it from start to finish. I think it's great. So number 4 is Casino Royale. This was Daniel Craig's first movie as Bond, and he, I think out of all of them, gives the best performance as Bond, and the way you see him change for like the beginning of the movie, he's just very arrogant and he's aggressive, and you see that change throughout the movie as Vesper and M kind of pull him back and make him learn that he can't survive as an agent if he just goes all out all the time. That scene in the embassy and like the whole parkour scene is amazing. There's really nothing in this movie I don't like. The only thing I can say is Vesper at times I'm not the biggest fan of her character, or maybe it was the way she was acting. That's really my only minor complaint. I like the whole thing where she's in the shower. with like she's actually clothed, and it was Daniel Craig's idea for her to be fully dressed and like in shock for what she did. But I don't know. There's just some of the lines she delivers is kind of weird. But either way, I think that the director of Casino Royale and the next movie is probably the best Bond director. And the next movie that I'm going to have on this list is number 3 is GoldenEye. One of the most iconic Bond movies. There's so many good like villains and henchmen in this movie. Xenia Onatopp, played by Famke Janssen. You have Sean Bean as the main villain, which is 006, or Alec Trevathan, and then you have Boris Krushenko, I think it is, by Alan. I think he's played by Alan Cummings. But that whole scene in like the computer room at the end there, where he's got the pen and he's got that bad habit, or the habit of like twirling the pen and clicking it, and you know that his pen is basically a grenade, and he clicks it and then he drops the pen and it blows up. That scene and the fight scene at the end, but just this movie from start to finish is great. I don't really have any complaints about it. I think Xenia Onatopp is probably in my top 3 Bond girls. And also the other Bond girl, trying to blank on her name, but yeah, she's also really great in this movie. I think it's one of the best Bond movies. It's the most iconic Bond video game. So yeah, GoldenEye comes in number 3 for me. And now these top 2. This was so hard for me to decide, and honestly, they're pretty much tied. I can watch either one at any time. The only reason I'm going to go ahead and say that number 2 is The World Is Not Enough and not number 1 is just because I think Daniel Craig is so good. So that's why Skyfall is number 1. But why The World Is Not Enough is number 2, and I know a lot of people are actually not a big fan of this movie. Why it is number 2 for me, this was the first Bond movie I ever saw. It was my favorite PlayStation 1 007 game. And like I said, I got it with Tomorrow Never Dies, so it was great. I just played that game so much. For it being just the first one I watched, the time in which I saw it, just everything about it, and I don't hate Denise Richards. I mean, she's not great at acting in it, I'll be honest, but I don't think she really ruins it. I just really like the villains, though. Renard is, I think that whole bullet in the brain, how it's slowly killing off his senses, he can push himself harder. I don't know why I like that, and that's like, to me, he's like got one of the most interesting quirks of a Bond villain. And then you have Elektra King as like the main Bond villain, and I think that she's really well acted. And I can't remember her name either off the top of my head. But yeah, Sophia something. If I sat here and thought about it long enough, it would come to me. Sophie Marseille, that's it. And yeah, but I think she does a great job as Elektra King, and you can see that she at times gets to Bond emotionally, and whenever he finally at the end has to kill her, it affects him. But that whole scene where he points the gun at her and he yells at her to call off the submarine exploding with the bomb, the nuke in it, like putting the nuclear rod into the reactor. He tells her to call it off, and she's like, you won't kill me, you'll miss me too much. And you can see he's like, I don't want to do it. And he's like hesitating in his mind, but then as soon as she says Renard and she screams to dive, he pulls the trigger, and then he says, I never miss. I just think that line is like great. And just what she does also, Elektra, to M, and how she just orchestrates this whole thing. And also I want to mention that the song by Garbage, The World Is Not Enough, is my favorite Bond song. And I love that intro, the women being like oil silhouettes, and then like the planet or the world being like, almost looks like it's a ball of fire. And just the motto, The World Is Not Enough, because it's Bond's motto, or his family motto. I don't know, I really love this movie, and I think it's probably the most underrated Bond movie. Despite it having Denise Richards and most people not liking that, I'm okay with it. And so, Yeah, it comes in at number 2, and it is really just, it's basically equal. I would say, honestly, the movie The World Is Not Enough, I probably do like more, but Skyfall, because Daniel Craig is my favorite Bond, and just what they did with the story in this one, I just really like it. So, at the beginning, you get that awesome chase scene on the train. Bond is shot. He basically retires, fakes, or he plays like he's dead. And then whenever he finds out that MI6 was attacked, he comes back, and he's not himself. He's not physically fit anymore. And M's on her way out. She's forced to like slowly retire, and you can see that it's like both of them are starting to be like played out. But they dealing with Silva, who is one of the best Bond villains, and that whole scene where he's in the glass like case or in the prison, and he's talking with M, and he calls her Mila, and he calls her by her actual name, and he says, "Look upon your work, Mila," and he takes his like fake teeth out, and he says, "Do you know what hydrogen cyanide does to you?" That scene is just awesome. That's my favorite scene in the whole movie. I just think this movie's great. He reminds me so much of like Heath Ledger's Joker. He's like one step ahead this whole movie. And the only thing that I can really say that I'm not like, I don't usually like the shootout at the house as much. I still like it just because it's a good action scene, but like the way that's written, and like it feels like it's Home Alone. It's like, I don't know, it's still interesting and I like it, but that's my only one minor nitpicky thing about this movie. So yeah, that's my Bond ranking. I would love to hear your ranking. What's your least favorite? Your favorite? Which ones do you think that I maybe didn't talk enough about? You know, like, which ones do you think I maybe was like, hey, maybe could have been more lenient on this thing, and let's just say Live and Let Die, or For Your Eyes Only, or something. Just let me know what your thoughts on any of the movies are on the video. And, you know, I'm a really big Bond fan, so really none of these movies I hate. I like them all. So, yeah. Thanks for watching, guys, and talk to you soon.